Good morning. This is Jenny Waller with Waller Consulting. I am changing up a little bit today, so want to make sure that you all understand. I'm joining you from my now office bedroom because my kids are downstairs in my actual office, getting homeschooled. So I'm going to have to be filming videos to you all from my office, which is my office in my bedroom. Very interesting dynamic. I'm sure many of you are experiencing right now. Um, in addition, I have a lot of noise in the background, so I'll be wearing headphones to try to filter out that noise and make sure that you can hear me as well as possible. So today's session is about crisis planning. Now, it's not to give you one more thing to do. It's actually to help you. I believe that planning oftentimes will alleviate a lot of the stress that we're under. So take it for what it is. If you don't feel like implementing anything that you hear today, that's completely fine. That's where you are in your process. But I'm hoping that you will hear some things that you could go ahead and start implementing to help you with the current crisis we're under. And of course, once this is over, what a great opportunity to see how it worked, what happened, and then reevaluate what you're doing in your own business. And then you can use the formula that I'm providing you today to make the changes necessary once you're back into full action. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here and hopefully be able to do this little presentation with you guys. Okay, so crisis planning. This is preparing your business for the inevitable, which of course at this point is here. I don't think any of us could have predicted this. So again, take what you want from it and leave the rest. Come back later. So today we're going to go over a few things, the types of crisis that can happen, and that there's a myriad. The worst of which thus far that I can tell is certainly this pandemic. Though with a good crisis plan, could definitely be managed. Risk survey analysis to see what position your organization or business is in right now to face any sort of crisis, the actual crisis plan and the elements of that, and then actual implementation of that plan. So what are some things that could happen? Okay, so the obvious. By the way, if you need to ask any questions, you can always email me at jenny.waller@wallerconsulting.org. I'm happy to answer any questions and send you resources that I have. So in regards to types of crisis, obviously pandemic, but also thinking of any theft by your staff members, embezzlement, bookkeeper theft, things that are happening at the higher level, so no one's really watching, especially in your smaller businesses. Fire or hurricane, so your natural disasters, a death of one of your key personnel. So we'll talk later about your crisis management team, a death member of one of those, especially your director or your founder, CEO. Lawsuits. And you see this a lot with nonprofits, especially, certainly with businesses as well. You carry a lot of liability insurance, but it can ruin your brand. So we'll talk about that. Negative media coverage, some of that's part of lawsuits, and of course, any sort of endemic health crisis like this. Some examples of negative media coverage and lawsuits. So Susan G. Komen, back in 2012, the federal funds were being threatened to be cut to Susan G. Komen if they didn't discontinue funding Planned Parenthood. And it was a really big circus, and people were divided down the lines of abortion and had some really strong opinions. Susan G. Komen came out very blatantly without surveying stakeholders, without getting a good idea of what its members looked like, its donors, its employees and staff, and said, we are going to continue what we're doing. And there was a huge backlash. They saw their federal funding dry up almost overnight. And in addition to that, individual donations really dried up. So in addition to having a negative media coverage, they had a funding issue and they were in serious crisis, and they could have done with a crisis plan. A crisis plan would have involved knowing what their stakeholders wanted. Another example is the NFL with the domestic violence and sexual assault issues the NFL experienced a few years ago, and how they handled that was a bit of miraculous handling, in that now the NFL is one of the largest funders on college campuses of curriculum for athletes to prevent domestic violence and sexual assault. They also host a lot of commercials and things like that, and have a really good perception in the community of being an organization that is taking it seriously. So they had a plan in place, and it worked very effectively. Don't we all wish we had teams like marketing and management teams like the NFL? But we can be prepared. So the reason this came up for me was in 2012, the building that our offices were housed in had a large fire. The fire didn't actually burn our belongings, but they were affected by smoke damage. And more importantly, it was an unstable flooring. So we were not able to access our equipment and different items, and we couldn't see clients there. The building was ultimately gutted and had to be completely steel frame rebuilt at a certain point. But that was many years after we were already out. So in the meantime, I'm watching the flames go up the building, and I'm thinking in my head, I am the director of this organization, and I do not have a plan. What a scary position to be in. And some of you may have recently had this exact same thought. I am watching the fires go up in my building, and I don't have a plan. So obviously, this is different than a fire, the pandemic, and you're having to make some different concessions, but really all crises are the same in their elements. So let's get started. First, are you ready? So let's do a risk assessment. Do you have a crisis management team? So let's say you are the CEO and you're it, right? You're boss lady, and you have a staff of a part-time bookkeeper and a paralegal. That is your crisis team. And you're going to get those folks together, and we're going to call on that. Do you have a crisis management plan? We need a physical document. I know, more paperwork, but it totally helps to have something written down that the entire team knows. What about an emergency kit or an evacuation route? Do you have a media plan like the NFL did? Susan G. Komen didn't, and it really affected them. Is your staff trained? Do you have an emergency budget? Can you float your organization or your business for 3 months without any income coming in? Do you have a timeline for getting back to business? A description of space and agreements that you might use if you have to be out of your space and rent other space? If you're working from home, how are you going to finance your employees using their own internet and different things for business while still paying your own bills? Do you have a succession plan for key management if someone leaves unexpectedly? These are things to consider. So drafting your plan. Let's see. First, you want to think of who's on your team. So we talked a little bit about if you're a small business, what it needs to look like. These are some other individuals that could possibly be on your board or your crisis team or your A team. You may not have a lawyer on staff. Most of us do not, but you may know a lawyer. And I would highly recommend you go ahead and contact them and let them know that if something happens, you would like them to be your go-to. And maybe not just one lawyer, but 2 lawyers. You also should have someone familiar with financials, easily accessible and part of your A team. Even if they're not key every day in your office, there should be someone that has some knowledge of financials and accounting background who can assist you in times of crisis. Excuse me. You also, if you're heavily in merchandise organization or business, you may want to have someone as a representative from one of your vendors. So really think outside the box here, but there needs to be a core team that would get together if that fire is going up the side of your building. So really simple, basic, something that most of us don't have. The American Red Cross recommends you have an emergency kit. And if you have to evacuate from your building, it's a hurricane and someone's injured, you have to have emergency supplies on staff. If your electricity goes out, you need flashlights. If you just Google American Red Cross, there's emergency kit for the office and an emergency kit from home. You can buy them prepackaged, or you can put together your own using supplies that you probably have around. You may have to order one or two things. So go ahead and get this in place. It's not going to hurt. You can put it in the back of a shelf and not have to think about it until you review that crisis plan again in the following year. Your evacuation route. So I used our organization's mapping plan, our building plan essentially for when we developed it after we moved into our new space after the fire. And I just mapped it out using red pen, nothing fancy, showing where the exits were and where the meeting locations were going to be, where the Red Cross safety kit was, and in the fire extinguishers, where the utility cabinet was with all of our equipment, our technology, and our server. So just some things that you would want to have mapped out on an evacuation plan map. And keep this in your Red Cross bag. Document retention. This is a huge issue, especially for small business. So you have all these documents that you never access on a daily basis. Your incorporation documents, your nonprofit 501c3 documents, your bylaws, or your employee handbook. I want you to think about the documents that you're going to need. I have a list. If you want to contact me, I'm certainly happy to share that. But there's a list of documents, inventories, photos of that inventory, your client records, any leases, emergency contact information, but also all your contract information, any contracts you have, deadlines. All of this needs to be scanned in, saved, and backed up to an external server somewhere out in the netherworld so that you can access it in case anything happens in your building or happens where you can't get back in, whatever the case may be. Audits, taxes, the basics information, and your team will come together and say what your list is. And it may be pretty extensive, and the list needs to be written in your management plan, and information about where those documents can be found should be very detailed out, mapped out in your crisis management plan. Okay. You also need to have written into your plan your space and equipment needs. If you end up losing your space, how much space are you going to need? So at SDSM, Sexual Trauma Services, where I was the director when the fire occurred, we had at that time, I believe 18 employees or 19 employees. How much square footage am I going to need? Am I going to need 10 offices? Can I squish some people in? Who can be squished in? I had to have that already mapped out. Do I have to have 19 computers, or can some people share? Can we alternate schedules so that some people are working days, some are working nights? There's computers can be shared, the space can be shared. Let's set some deadlines for getting up and running. We want to see how long can we literally get this show back up on the road if we are out of commission. Can we get computers in one day? Can we get space in one day? If we have everything in place, you should have no downtime between the incident occurring, the crisis occurring, and getting back up, going to making money. An accurate list of stakeholders. So all your contracts, all of your vendors, all of your donors, you need to have a really accurate and up-to-date list, whether that's in the cloud or something that you're constantly keeping up in your at home, whatever it needs to be. You need to have an updated list. You need to ask your crisis team to help you keep this updated. A media plan needs to be a part of this, especially if you're a nonprofit. Unfortunately, in nonprofit world, we are under such restrictions as to how we can operate. It's great. It means that we're going to be doing stellar work, but people are always watching. And if you have a fire in your building, they want to know, are you going to the hospital and responding to our clients that we're giving you money to serve? Are you still going to be alive after all this is over? And in fact, for Sexual Trauma Services, our media plan ended up coming together very quickly, and we were able to use the fire as an opportunity to actually build new funding base and create additional funding for the organization. So in the long run, we actually made money off of the crisis. And that's really your goal, and not really off the crisis, but from the actual incident. It was a lot of trauma for the staff. So you're never going to come out equal, but you definitely can look at how you can at least benefit in some ways from the crisis occurring. A succession plan, you need to have this in place. If tomorrow your CEO, your founder, is hit by a Mack truck, we say this in law school, the Mack truck theory, if they disappear off the face of the earth, what is your plan? Could your organization keep going without interruption in service and interruption in business? In most cases, you are shaking your head because it's just not the case. You would probably stop all things. So have a plan in place. Who's going to come together and make the organization work if something happens to your primary leader? How are you going to continue operating and keeping the wheels in motion so that money is coming in and staff stay employed? Emergency budget. So that's expensive, right? Setting up space, buying equipment or renting space, getting a consultant possibly for anything that has to be managed, such as a new search for a new staff, such as IT setup, things like that. That costs money. That needs to be in your crisis plan. Think of your emergency budget. What are your costs going to be? Is it going to be 20 grand to get you set back up? And that needs to be for all extreme measures. Go the biggest that your budget needs to be, and then make sure you've got it covered. Like keep a separate fund if you have to. Let's see. Also think of things about counseling for your employees. An employee assistance plan, if you do not have one currently, or program, if you do not have one currently for your employees, is a very inexpensive way to tack on an additional benefit for your employees that is just will work wonders, especially during the time of crisis. And not just that, but strongly encourage all of your employees to participate in the plan and to use their sessions. You may also have to hire lawyers. Think about that for your emergency plan, and keep those names: lawyers, consultants, possible rented space, possible IT equipment, IT consultants if you don't have any that you work with now for your current system. Anyone that you're going to need to reach out to help you get up and running or to keep you running, keep that information in your actual crisis plan. For STSM, after the fire was over and the drama had passed and we had time to really reflect, I put into place contracts with organizations and businesses in town that would provide us office space at either free or reduced cost if we needed to move into their space. I also had a contract for contingency with a local IT company to help us get set up and running so that it didn't cost us so much money like it did the first go round to get set up and running outside the agency. We also created a lot of cloud-based systems and had to really do that security because we worked with clients' confidential information and had to develop and spend quite a bit of money on that to get systems in place to be able to operate outside the office if that ever came to. And it ended up being that we created a different business model while we were doing it, and then a lot of work could be done outside the office that had not been done prior. So it actually opened doors to different types of business and was good for us. It was a growth process. So I also want you to reflect on that if you had to cut your budget tomorrow by 50%, what would go? What would you have to cut? Many of you are going to say employees. Well, and that's the reality of our business. But which employees? And could you cut something like benefits and offer them, loss of benefits before you cut actual employees? Or could you cut their time differently? What are your agency's priorities? What are your organization's priorities? Is it about continuing to achieve for sexual trauma services, it was to continue our crisis operations, and maybe counseling could go. And so we looked at which staff members would be the first that we would have to let go. We had a plan in place. What are your minimum monthly expenses? Absolutely minimum. Then make sure you have 3 months, at least 3 months of those in your budget are saved somewhere. And make sure you're always staying within financial policy compliance. When you get outside into an emergency situation, it's very easy to say, well, let's waive the rules about our financial policies. We don't need to necessarily comply with getting all these signatures on our checks. We don't necessarily need to comply with having a minimum amount in our endowment, on and on and on. That's just not true. Use your crisis as an opportunity to stabilize and to make sure you are complying with all of your policies that you have in place. They're there for a reason, and not to ignore them. For your succession plan, who's going to be the interim? Who's going to do the search to lead for another leader? Who's going to develop and support staff during the time that things are going on? Are your senior staff content so that if you do have change in leadership, they won't leave? How can you make sure they're content? Is your management team working well together? Do they work together every day? What about onboarding of staff members? And then, of course, expenses for that. And I'm way over. Sorry about that. So more than paper, it's a living document. You want to review with staff. You want to make sure that you walk through all the scenarios as well as onboard new staff. You want to have a team meeting regularly, and they should anyway, probably for other things. We'll just make part of crisis planning just a part of that. Maybe tack 5 minutes onto every meeting. You also want to do a review annually and make sure it's still working and applicable, because a lot of our businesses change after a year. And if you have a volunteer board, of course, you need to discuss the board volunteer with them. Many of them will, at least your board chair will be on your A team. So I want to give you a quiz, 2 chances to win a free organizational assessment. So if you will just email me, and my email will be at the end of this video, and you email me the answers to these questions, I will send you information about obtaining a free organizational assessment. So the first question is, do you have a crisis management plan? Are you operating under a crisis management plan right now during the pandemic? And the second is, do you have an emergency budget? Or are you really flying by the seat of your pants right now? The answers do not matter. These are questions I want you just thinking about. It's really important. So this is an opportunity to have your name entered in, so you can send it to me by the end of the month. And on the 5th of every month, I will draw a name and I will do a free organizational business assessment for that business. So here's my contact information. And you can find me at jenny.waller@wallerconsulting.org. And please don't hesitate to send me an email if you need additional information. If you would like copies of the slide presentation, it will be available in the comments section of this video, as well as on my Facebook page. Thank you so much for joining me. I wish you nothing but the best through this crisis. And please don't hesitate again to reach out if you need anything from me. Thanks so much, and have a great day. Bye.